If you're one of the people who have only seen Berserk in anime form, whether it's the anime itself or the 3 Golden Age movies, you might have one of 3 questions running through your mind. Number 1, why does Guts not like people touching him? Number 2, where did Guts come from for him to be so cynical about the world? And number 3, how the hell does he swing that Dragon Slayer around like it's Salat's Urami? Well, the answer to all 3 of those questions lies in his childhood. Guts has had one of the worst upbringings in the history of Berserk, and we say this from an objective point of view. None of Berserk's anime adaptations have ever shown his childhood in full detail because it's so traumatic that showing it on screen would probably ruin the viewing experience for you, the audience. He was born just how the title of this video suggests, and nothing went right for him from that moment onward until, ironically enough, he met Griffith. But you won't know half of these stories if you've just seen Berserk through the medium of anime, and you certainly wouldn't know one of them because it hasn't even been adapted to screen yet. So, without further ado, this is Guts' traumatic childhood explored. He was born in a mire of blood and afterbirth, the haunting circumstances of Guts' birth. Very rarely can we say that a character has been marked for doom since the moment of their birth when discussing fiction, which is what makes Guts so special in our opinion. He was born from literal death, as his body was found by a group of mercenaries underneath a dead body hanging from a tree. Guts' mother likely passed away as she was giving birth to him, and Guts himself wouldn't have survived his birth if he wasn't rattled into crying by Shisu. He was motionless before his body was picked up by this half-crazy camp follower, and he was about to be left for dead by her lover had he not indulged her fancy. Later on in life, Guts would learn that he excelled at escaping death's maw precisely because he was born at its doorstep. It's kinda cool that because he was born from a corpse, it would take more than chomping his arm off to kill him, but it's mostly terrifying because who wants battle immortality like that? You might think that at least living is worth it given how precious the concept of life is to us as human beings, but, well, Guts' adoptive mom died when he was 3, and his stepdad was a terrible tough guy. Guts' troubled childhood. Despite being at the verge of insanity prior to finding Guts due to a harrowing miscarriage, Shisu somewhat recovered because of him. The 3 years she spent nursing Guts to health and raising him as her own were probably the best years of her life. They were certainly the only years that Guts grew up knowing parental love, because once Shisu died, his life became synonymous with hardship. When Guts was 3 years old, Shisu contracted the plague. This wasn't uncommon for a camp follower who was dragged from one battlefield to another, but for a child, it was probably the worst tragedy imaginable. Though Guts was still at an age where he couldn't form proper sentences, he knew that Shisu, the only mother he was ever going to have, was dying when he saw her. He held her hand in her final moments and was a big reason why she passed away in relative peace. But since the moment of Shisu's death, Guts' life became living hell, and that was because her lover blamed Guts for everything. Gambino never said it outright because he had ridiculed the prospect of Guts surviving the day Shisu picked him up, and yet with every passing hour the child kept proving him wrong. Shisu died because of the plague while he was off fighting in a siege, and Guts held her hand in her dying moments, yet he somehow remained plague-free. And then, to rub salt in the wound, he followed Gambino around like some lost pup. By the time Guts was 6, he already knew the basics of surviving in a mercenary band, and while that showed insane adaptability on his part, it was also deeply tragic simply because of the nature of a mercenary. They were bloodthirsty and selfish individuals by nature, so that was the only personality Guts knew how to grow up with. At the age of 6, he was thrust into the battlefield as Gambino's squire, and was nearly killed as well. Later, the mercenary leader decided to teach Guts how to wield a sword, but ended up going too far in his lesson when the boy actually took his advice and countered his attacks. When Guts turned 9, Gambino had him participate in his first battle as a soldier, and though he kept Guts on his feet then, he wasn't exactly thrilled about it. He once used Guts as a decoy alongside several new recruits, and used it as a lesson to teach him to think for himself, but in truth, he probably arranged that decoy squad just to get Guts killed. Gambino was what most people would call a tough love kinda dad for the first couple of Golden Age chapters, but the ugly truth about his behavior towards Guts had always been simmering just underneath the surface. It boiled over when, after losing his leg and his pride as a mercenary leader, Gambino decided to correct his mistake from 11 years ago. His father sold him out to a predator for 3 coins of silver and tried to kill him when that didn't work. How Gambino became the catalyst for Guts' worst childhood trauma. In the aftermath of Guts' first battle, Gambino commended him for his hard work and even gave him a silver coin as a reward. Perhaps that was why Guts didn't believe Donovan when he said that it was Gambino who sold him out to the Merc for a night. Guts put up a resistance against his assaulter at first when he understood Donovan's intentions, but his body went completely limp after being told that Gambino had given him up for 3 coins of silver. Guts was violated by Donovan so harshly that it gave him PTSD for a good portion of his life. He tried to confirm his accusations against Gambino the next morning by facing the man with a sword. But when Gambino's face didn't give off a hint of betrayal, Guts decided to take care of Donovan himself. He did just that in the very next battle his band rode into, but it was too late. The damage had been done by Donovan, and from that day onwards, Guts would always give a violent reaction to anyone who tried to touch him. This formative trauma was left out of the 1997 anime and only briefly alluded to in the Golden Age movies, but you can understand why the animators would do that. Guts wouldn't even find out that his victim had not been lying that night until 2 years later, and that revelation too would be drenched in all sorts of tragedy for the lad. When Guts turned 11, it had been 2 years since Gambino lost his leg, and thereby all interest in the boy himself. He would much rather look after his pet dog than Guts, and even whacked the kid for not bringing the dog meat, despite him having slain the enemy general in his most recent fight. Guts couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling he got from Gambino's reaction towards him literally offering up all the money he had earned that day, and rolled over thinking he'd just earn more money the next day when he tried to sleep. It was at that moment his world came crashing down around him. Gambino entered his tent, sloppy drunk and armed with a sword. He lunged with a blade towards Guts but missed, and started unloading all his issues onto the kid. Gambino blamed Guts for everything. Shisu's death, his leg, every bad thing that had happened in his life he pinned on Guts. He finally agreed with his men's sentiments from 11 years ago, and called Guts a cursed child before driving the final nail in the coffin of their relationship. Gambino revealed that he did, in fact, pay off Donovan that fateful night. Guts was an emotional wreck upon hearing all of this. He couldn't understand why the man he looked up to as a father wanted him dead so bad, and thus he was shocked himself when his body reacted to Gambino's second lunge and killed him instantly. Every day of his life was a fight to survive and see the next day. Guts' life from Gambino's death to the day he became a Falcon. Guts escaped the band he grew up with and was shot down in pursuit, fought a pack of wolves after falling off a cliff, and somehow still managed to survive. He was eventually found passed out from his wounds by another mercenary band, who took him in and kept him on the path of the sword. But the Guts who had awakened from that near-fatal slumber would be quite different from the boy who went into it. Scarred by so many horrifying personal developments, Guts formed an exterior shell of toughness which he rarely allowed anyone to breach. He also started actively seeking out battles and began fighting each fight as if it was his last. He only trusted himself and the sword he wielded in life, and everyone else was an enemy on his list. This lone wolf mentality did not do him any favors, and Miura expanded upon it in a rare flashback from volume 37. A few months before he killed Bazuso and came across the Band of the Falcon, Guts was captured by an enemy force and was being led to their castle for imprisonment. In the line of prisoners was an older mercenary called Martino, who sweet-talked his way into Guts' momentary good graces. You see, the young swordsman was sporting an arrow wound and refusing to take any assistance, and Martino had seen his kind over the years, over and over again. He used his experience and his silver tongue to plant the idea of a rapid escape into Guts' mind, and freed him from his bonds, portraying himself as an old goof with no hope of salvation. In truth, Martino had used Guts as a distraction to facilitate his own escape, and Guts would curse himself for his softness in the dank cell that his captives threw him in for his insubordination. It would be Gambino's words that would keep him alive through his imprisonment, ironically enough, alongside a flower spirit named Chich. And even though Martino returned to the castle with his own band a few days later to liberate it, it was clear from his behavior that Guts being alive was just a happy accident for him. This instance only solidified Guts' cynicism, and since it was the last scene we got got from his childhood before he crushed Pazuzu and earned Griffith's undying attention, this is where the purpose of this video comes to an end. At the beginning of the video, we put forth 3 questions, and after tracing Guts' childhood, we can see that all 3 of them were somehow related to his formative years. The reason he doesn't like people touching him is because he was violated by a man he thought was his comrade at a very young age. The reason behind him being as cynical and nihilistic as he is the fact that he was raised by Gambino, who gave him an inheritance of battle intelligence and traumatic memories galore. And the reason behind him being able to swing Dragon Slayer the way he can is simple. He's been fighting with swords double his size his entire life. Guts trained with an adult-sized sword at the age of 6, and even at 15, his preferred weapon was a greatsword about as tall as him. None of this has been shown in any anime adaptation of Berserk, and so it's understandable that many people don't get why Guts is as aggressive as he is. He has seen the worst side of humanity since he came into this world, and that is exactly why he's the feared black swordsman that hunts down apostles at the start of the series. Marvelous verdict. And that's it for this video. Guts is a character that has truly been shaped by every experience he's had since birth, and this is why his childhood is so important to the narrative of Berserk. And because of the spiraling nature of fate in Berserk, he's probably not even aware that he's been treating his own child the way he was treated as a kid. If you go through our video breaking down the existence of Guts and Casca's demon child, you'll realize that Guts has unintentionally become just like his father. Casca, in her mindless state, is just like Shisu, Guts' adoptive mom. And as for the demon child, well, Skull Knight called him cursed right after his birth. And if that doesn't ring any bells for you guys, then you really need to go reread the Golden Age prequel chapters and do it stat. But apart from that, what did you think about this video? Would you like to see more such explorative Berserk and anime content in general? Let us know in the comment section down below, and we'll see you soon with more quality content.